Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to Susan G. Komen's virtual NBC Impact Series event. My name is Carly Domenico, and I'm the Scientific Communications Manager at Susan G. Komen. The programming for this series is envisioned as a year-long conversation with attendees presenting new information and speakers each month. Today, our topic is NBC research highlights from ASCO, the American Society of Clinical Oncology's annual meeting. Our featured speaker is Janice Cowden, NBC patient and advocate, and our fantastic moderator is Olivia Anthony, Manager of Scientific Communications at Susan G. Komen. Before we begin, Komen would like to thank our sponsors for supporting the 2025 NBC Impact Series. Thank you to our premier sponsors, AstraZeneca, Gilead, and Merck, and our signature sponsors, Daiichi Sankyo and Novartis. This series is made possible because of their generosity. One more housekeeping note is that while our speakers are talking, please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we're going to get to as many of those as we can. The Q&A feature is distinct from the chat function. Please remember that our speakers are not able to provide individual medical advice, so keep questions as general as possible. Towards the end of the program, a survey link will be placed in the chat, and your feedback is very important to us and really helpful for us to continue to identify topics for future NBC Impact Series events and NBC programs. Now we're excited that you're all joining us for today's discussion. And to start, I'd like to introduce you to our moderator, Olivia Anthony. Olivia spent more than 10 years as a cancer researcher prior to joining Komen. She received her PhD in cancer biology at the University of Colorado Medical Campus, where she studied breast cancer stem cells. She then went on to study invasive lobular breast cancer metastasis at the University of Pittsburgh prior to joining Komen in 2022. At Komen, she leads some of our education programs, including Breast Cancer Breakthroughs and No More, and she constantly monitors the breast cancer research landscape to ensure that our community is informed about the latest advancements in breast cancer care. We are so awesome. I guess I'll hand it over to you now, Olivia. Thanks.
Thank you, Carly. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here and tell you all about everything that happened at ASCO this year. So as Carly said, one of the parts of my job is to monitor what's going on in the breast cancer world. And a big part of that is watching what's going on at scientific conferences. So we do this primarily by following some of the big conferences like the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium and the ASCO annual meeting. And the reason is this is where some of the big clinical trials, particularly the phase 3 clinical trials results, are presented. And these compare new treatments to current standard of care. So these are the presentations that have the potential to change clinical practice. So this year at ASCO, there was over 40,000 attendees from doctors, patient advocates, researchers, all coming together to discuss the latest and greatest in cancer research. So with that, I think I will be introducing Janice, our wonderful guest today. So Janice is an NBC patient and advocate. She was diagnosed with stage 4 triple-negative breast cancer in 2016, 5 years after an early stage breast cancer diagnosis. Janice launched into patient advocacy following training through Living Beyond Breast Cancer's Hear My Voice outreach program in 2017. As a peer-to-peer support and research patient advocate, Janice is passionate about supporting others with metastatic breast cancer, in addition to continually furthering her scientific knowledge base of this disease, treatments, and clinical trials, which she acquires through attending scientific breast cancer conferences and webinars. Janice is involved in several patient-founded and led organizations, including PCDI, GRASP, and Project Life NBC. As a trained peer support volunteer, she is founder of an international online peer support group for patients newly diagnosed with MBC. She serves on the board of directors for Mediviver Research and Support, Inc., and is an advisory board member for Project Life NBC. She's an individual member of the Metastatic Breast Cancer Alliance. And when she's not busy with all of this amazing advocacy work, Janice enjoys traveling, reading, outdoor activities, and spending time with her family, including her husband, 2 adult children, and 3 grandchildren. So with that, I will turn it over to Janice.
Hi, thank you, Olivia, for that wonderful introduction. I'm so happy to Komen for inviting me to be here today. I have been a member of the Susan G. Komen Advocates in Science for several years. And like you mentioned before in my introduction, I am primarily a research and peer support patient advocate. I attend conferences like ASCO and San Antonio in order to continue my own education with regards to the science behind metastatic breast cancer, but also to help pass on that knowledge to others who are in the NBC community and to help translate scientific information to lay language that patients can understand so that they can become better self-advocates themselves. So thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'll turn it back over to you, Olivia.
Wonderful, thank you. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, so just wanting to start off with some of the big takeaways that we saw at this year's meeting. One of the big takeaways for me was just seeing all the progress for across all types of metastatic breast cancer. A lot of times when we go to these conferences, there seems to be a big study announced for one type of breast cancer and maybe just a few other smaller studies. But here we saw a lot of really big trials across all types, ER positive, HER2 positive, and triple negative breast cancer. So these are some of the things we'll talk about today and these different trials that we'll highlight. So wanted to start with metastatic ER positive breast cancer and just kind of set the stage for how this type of metastatic breast cancer is currently treated. This is a very basic overview of how this disease is treated. It's a lot more complex than this, largely because treatment has gotten far more personalized. So there are other treatment options that kind of target different mutations. But for the purposes of what was discussed at ASCO, I thought we'd go over it a more simplified manner. So usually
Olivia,
oh
sorry
yes,
to interrupt you. Just want to let you know if you do want to display, I think you're displaying the note side of the screen. If you
oh, you're
might make
right.
it better if you do the other way.
Yes, you are
Thanks.
so right. Let me try that again. Still like that. Okay. Anyone have any suggestions of how to not share the notes?
Are you using multiple screens or just one monitor?
Oh, yep, multiple monitors. That's
Yeah, because then I think if you just specify the other monitor, it should work.
it's funny. We use Teams so often
I
and
know.
we don't know how to do it in Zoom. Oh, screen two. Okay, I think
Perfect.
that's better, right?
Yay. Yep.
Okay,
Thank
sorry
you.
about that, everyone. Okay, so back to metastatic ER positive breast cancer. So when diagnosed with metastatic ER positive breast cancer, people are typically treated with an aromatase inhibitor, which is something like letrozole or anastrozole, in combination with a CDK4/6 inhibitor, which could be palbociclib, ribociclib, or abemaciclib. And this treatment is pretty effective first line, but unfortunately, patients ultimately usually end up progressing, and then they'll switch to their second line of treatment, which is typically fulvestrant, which is a SERD, a selective estrogen receptor degrader, or elacestrant, which was recently approved for cancers that have developed ESR1 mutations, which keep that in mind because that'll be important for our discussion. And then if they progress on that, then they move on to third line, which consists of a few antibody drug conjugates or ADCs or chemotherapy, depending on the characteristics of the breast cancer. So a little bit of background about ESR1 mutations. These are mutations in the estrogen receptor, and it allows the estrogen receptor to function without estrogen. So these ER-positive breast cancers, their growth is driven when estrogen interacts with the estrogen receptor that activates it, and that drives the cancer growth. But when the estrogen receptor undergoes a mutation, it allows it to function without estrogen. And so a lot of times these ESR1 mutations occur after there's been prolonged treatment with hormone therapy, particularly the aromatase inhibitors. So aromatase inhibitors work by getting rid of all the estrogen in the system, but if your estrogen receptor is able to be active without estrogen anyways, it makes this treatment ineffective. So that is a big issue in big question in research right now in improving treatment for metastatic ER-positive breast cancer is how can we overcome these ESR1 mutations? Other things we know is that these can be detected with liquid biopsy using circulating tumor DNA. And we also know that about 10 to 50% of metastatic ER-positive breast cancers will develop an ESR1 mutation. So it is a pretty big issue for metastatic ER-positive breast cancer. So that leads us to the first trial that we'll discuss, which was the phase 3 VERITAC-2 trial, which is looking for a new option for patients with ESR1 mutant metastatic breast cancer. This talk was presented by Dr. Erica Hamilton from the Sarah Cannon Research Institute. It is testing a new drug called vepdegestrant. It's a PROTAC ER degrader. It works very similarly to a SERD, a selective estrogen receptor degrader, by just getting rid of the estrogen receptor altogether. So here it doesn't really matter if you have an ESR1 mutation because it's just getting rid of the estrogen receptor altogether. Another advantage of vepdegestrant is that it's an oral medication. And in this trial, they compared it to fulvestrant, one of the current standards of care. And as some of you may know, fulvestrant is an injectable medicine. So patients have to go to the clinic about monthly to get this injection. So they tested this new drug in the second line setting. And a few of the big highlights from this study is that they did find that vepdegestrant improved progression-free survival, which this term will be coming up a lot in this presentation. So progression-free survival is the length of time a person lives before the cancer grows or spreads. So it's a common endpoint that researchers look at when they're judging whether or not these new treatments were effective. So vepdegestrant improved progression-free survival by about 3 months. And this is in participants that had the ESR1 mutations. And then what you can see is that in all participants, so including those that did not have ESR1 mutations, progression-free survival was not much different. And it was noted at the conference that this was pretty common in some of these newer ER targeting drugs. And another thing that Dr. Hamilton pointed out in her talk was that the treatment discontinuation rate was fairly low, so 3% for vepdegestrant and 1% for fulvestrant. So this is usually a fairly good indicator of how well this drug is tolerated by those who are taking it. And so that leads us to some of the implications and unanswered questions as a result of this trial. I think from what I've read, the company is planning to submit results for possible FDA approval, but it will also lead to some questions regarding clinical care. Will vepdegestrant or elacestrant be the preferred drug to take when you have an ESR1 mutation? And then also another question is, what comes next after one of these agents? What it would be the optimal treatment order? These are still questions that all remain. And then also, what about non-ESR1 mutant breast cancer? So you've seen that this drug is a little bit more effective for those that have ESR1 mutations, but it would still be great to have some oral options for those that do not have these ESR1 mutations. So now I'll pass it over to Janice to get her thoughts on this study.
Thanks, Olivia. Yeah, I found this to be a really exciting study that was presented at ASCO. And I think one of the reasons why is for those with hormone positive metastatic breast cancer, we have seen a surge of novel drug therapies and new drug approvals for the hormone receptor positive population. However, most of them require a mutation like ESR1 or PIK3 or something else. And so my personal excitement really lies in, I hope FDA with the similar progression-free survival between the two cohorts. I'm very, very hopeful, as I know most of the metastatic breast cancer community that are hormone receptor positive are hopeful that they will have a new option, regardless of whether or not they have an ESR1 mutation.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think everyone needs an option for this oral medication, and I think it'd be great if the regulatory powers that be see the same way. So, all right. So moving on to our next trial within the realm of ER-positive breast cancer. The SERENA-6 trial is another trial looking at ESR1 mutations in a little bit different way. What they're doing here is trying to get ahead of this treatment resistance. So this study was presented by Nicholas Turner from the Royal Marsden Hospital in the UK. So this trial is testing a new oral SERD, so another SERD that can be taken orally, not injected, called camizestrant. But they designed this trial a little bit different way. What they did was tested participants for ESR1 mutations every 2 to 3 months when they enrolled in the trial. And then when the mutation was detected, patients were randomized to switch to camizestrant or remain on their aromatase inhibitor plus CDK4/6 inhibitor. So this is different from what's normally done. And this is kind of a new term that was coined, molecular progression. So right now, we switch treatments when there is progression on a scan, but can we get ahead of this lingering chance of treatment resistance by targeting the ESR1 mutation when it presents itself? So they tested this in the first line setting. So patients that did not have this ESR1 mutation, once they get it, can they switch treatment? And does that improve outcomes? So they had some pretty exciting results here. So median progression-free survival for the camizestrant arm was 16 months compared to standard of care was 9.2 months. So pretty big difference there. They also looked at time to deterioration. So they gave a survey to participants to assess their quality of life while they were on these treatments. And that was a pretty big difference that they saw 23 months before patients really started to deteriorate in their quality of life for the camizestrant group versus only 6.4 on the current standard of care. Also, similarly to the last study, there was a pretty low rate of treatment discontinuations. So something that was great to see with this new potential drug. So some of the implications from this trial, one of the big unanswered questions that was addressed at the meeting was, does this treatment strategy improve PFS2 and overall survival? So PFS2 is the time to progression on a patient's second line of treatment. And it's important to, one of the possible concerns from the treatment strategy is that if you switch treatments too soon, are you limiting your options after this first treatment? And will that decrease the progression-free survival for your second line of treatment? And also, how will it impact overall survival? So big unanswered questions there. And the research group is still working on this, and we'll probably see more results at a future meeting. They also introduced the concept of test anxiety. So scan anxiety is already an issue when people with metastatic breast cancer go in for their scans. And if you're adding another layer of testing on top of that, does that increase anxiety? And is that worth the possible additional benefit that you get from the treatment? And then finally, there were some logistical considerations brought up. With all this extra testing, can our healthcare system infrastructure handle all of these additional tests that would be put through the system? So now I'd like to turn it over to Janice to see what she thinks about this trial and what it means for patients.
You brought up several excellent points, and as I was sitting in this session, there were some things that I thought of as well. For one, it was rather validating to see ctDNA actually being used in real-time decision making. It's something that we as patients have been advocating for, for the kind of precision care to be done, and we know it's not yet standard of care in the clinic. However, I thought during this session, Dr. Angela DiMichele, who was a discussant on the panel, brought up some really good points about the PFS2. And as a patient, some of the concerns would be, like you said, does it lead to longer progression-free survival, not only in the next treatment line, but what about in future treatment lines? Because we know that it's pretty common to see that the more treatment lines that you get, they tend to be a little bit less effective the farther in you get. And with us having a finite number of treatment lines altogether, if we use molecular progression to determine when we change treatment lines, and if it does not work out that PFS2 is increased with that, does that then just lead us to eliminating more treatment lines, in a quicker fashion than if we just did it based upon imaging progression?
Yeah, a lot of good points there. I like to think of this as very cautiously optimistic about this trial. Really exciting potential, but definitely a lot we need to learn about how this will actually improve outcomes. All right. Now moving on to HER2 positive breast cancer. So setting the stage for how this is currently treated. In the first line setting, patients are typically given what's known as THP. So this is a taxane, which is a type of chemotherapy, combined with some HER2 targeting antibodies, trastuzumab and pertuzumab. And then upon progression after that treatment, second line treatment is typically T-DXd or Enhertu, which is a HER2 targeting antibody drug conjugate. And then when patients get to the third line setting, there's a few different options. Most commonly T-DM1, which is another HER2 targeting antibody drug conjugate, and another treatment combination of tucatinib, trastuzumab, capecitabine. So some of the big questions right now in HER2 positive metastatic breast cancer, the THP, it has been the standard of care for first-line metastatic HER2 positive breast cancer since 2012. So it's been the standard of care for a long time, and it's because it's had pretty good it's led to pretty good outcomes for a lot of patients. But we do know that antibody drug conjugates have been transforming the treatment landscape of HER2 positive breast cancer. So T-DXd in particular has been kind of working its way up this ladder of when it should be used in treatment because it is a highly effective drug. And so one of the big questions, though, is can this first line of treatment be improved? Because it's what research seems to tell us is that the longer patients are on first line treatment, the better the outcomes. So this leads us to the DESTINY-Breast09 trial, which is testing a possible new first-line treatment for HER2 positive metastatic breast cancer. This was presented by Komen scholar, Dr. Sarah Tolaney of the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. So this trial was testing trastuzumab deruxtecan, which again is a HER2 targeting antibody drug conjugate, and currently the second-line standard of care for metastatic HER2-positive breast cancer. The trial had 3 arms. They are testing T-DXd in combination with pertuzumab, T-DXd alone, and comparing these 2 arms to the current standard of care, THP. And in the presentation at ASCO, they only had the data ready for this T-DXd plus P arm, but the results were pretty stunning. So they saw a pretty substantial increase in progression-free survival with this experimental arm, 40.7 months versus 26.9 months. One of the major side effects of T-DXd that we know about is called interstitial lung disease. So this is a side effect where the lung tissue becomes firm and hard, and it makes it hard for the lungs to fill with air. So it can cause some very serious problems if not caught early enough. And as you can see, there was a higher incidence of interstitial lung disease in this treatment arm versus the standard of care. And we did see more dose reductions in the T-DXd plus P arm versus THP, suggesting that this may have been a little harder to tolerate than the current standard of care. But I don't think that was all that surprising given what we know about T-DXd. While highly effective, it does come with some side effects. So some of the implications from this trial, some of the things that were brought up in the discussion is, while these are great results, does everyone need T-DXd when they're first diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer? So given the side effects that we see and also the pretty good outcomes that we see with the current standard of care, is it worth enduring some of these side effects of T-DXd when you might not necessarily need it to get good outcomes? And another thing that was brought up was, how long do people need to be on T-DXd? Maybe we can get by with a shorter duration of treatment rather than just continuous treatment of T-DXd when diagnosed with metastatic HER2-positive breast cancer. There's also currently some quality of life uncertainty. So in the current presentation, the researchers did not report out any quality of life data. So that will definitely be important when considering whether or not this will actually be incorporated into breast cancer treatment. And then also, we're awaiting the results from the T-DXd alone arm, because of course, if we can get as good of outcomes without additional combinations, so without adding pertuzumab to the mix, maybe that will also improve some of the quality of life for the patients for that arm. So things we're all excited to see, and again, we'll probably see more of this at future conferences. So I will turn it over to Janice to get her thoughts on what she thought about this trial.
Thanks, Olivia. It was a very impressive trial as far as the data that they presented at ASCO. A couple of thoughts that I think patients think of is exactly what you said. Is it necessary to have this drug with the known side effects and toxicities as a first-line treatment when following the induction phase of THP? Usually Herceptin and Perjeta is a fairly manageable, well-tolerated combination. And for those who respond well, they may have a very long run on that as their first line of treatment. I think another concern in the patient community is that we have so little data available on sequencing of ADCs right now. So if we put in HER2 as a first line treatment for those who are HER2 positive, what does that mean for possibly future lines of ADC treatment, because we don't have good sequencing data yet? And also, I think ILD is a definite reason for concern, putting it in the first line. If patients do develop even mild ILD, because we have not a lot of data yet about rechallenging patients on an ADC after they do develop ILD. I think that's some questions that, those are some questions that we really need answers to at this point. And hopefully by the time we get to San Antonio, we'll have more answers than what we had leaving ASCO.
Absolutely. Yes. And I love that you brought up that TDXD or that the THP. I think one of the things that was brought up at ASCO was that it's the taxane portion of THP that diminishes the quality of life for those patients. But once they're on the maintenance therapy, that's usually a pretty high quality of life. So really interesting to see how they compared that. But I'm glad that that was brought up at the presentation in the discussion. All right, so moving on to triple negative breast cancer. So again, setting the stage, when someone is diagnosed with metastatic triple negative breast cancer, there's kind of two pools. If their cancer is PD-L1 positive, they are treated with chemotherapy combined with an immune checkpoint inhibitor called pembrolizumab. And if they're PD-L1 negative, their option is chemotherapy. Going into the second line, there are some options for antibody drug conjugates, such as sacituzumab govitecan, which is a TROP2 targeting antibody drug conjugate, or TDXD if their cancer is HER2 low. And then third line, it's usually back to chemotherapy. So as you can see, for triple negative, there's relatively fewer options for metastatic triple negative breast cancer, and initial treatment is dependent on PD-L1 status. And one thing that was brought up at the meeting is that there really is a need for more effective first-line treatments because this is a particularly aggressive disease, and a lot of times patients don't always make it to where they are able to receive the second line of treatment. So the more effective the first-line treatment is, the better. So this leads us to the ASCENT-04 trial, which, like DESTINY-Breast09, was testing a new first-line treatment for TNBC. So this was also presented by Komen scholar Sarah Tolaney. And this is testing sacituzumab govitecan, the TROP2 targeting antibody drug conjugate, in combination with pembrolizumab. And this is comparing it to the current standard of care chemotherapy plus pembrolizumab. So this, as you can see, it's really just seeing, can we swap out the chemotherapy for this more targeted antibody drug conjugate? And there is some rationale for targeting, for kind of combining these two things. There is some thought that immunotherapy and antibody drug conjugates can sort of synergize the effect of immunotherapy. So some kind of rationale for doing this treatment combination. And actually, if you're interested in this and about immunotherapy and triple negative breast cancer, we're going to be, there's going to be an episode of Breast Cancer Breakthroughs next week highlighting how immunotherapy is being improved in triple negative breast cancer. So I would encourage you to check that out. And so for this trial, what they found is that this combination did improve median progression-free survival by about 3 months, so 11.2 months versus 7.8 for the standard of care. One of the other things we saw, there was still a pretty high rate of severe side effects for both groups. So unfortunately, we didn't see a drastic drop from the current standard of care and the amount of severe side effects, but we did see fewer treatment discontinuations in the sacituzumab govitecan arm versus the standard of care arm. So that is promising. So after seeing this presentation, it's likely that this will become a potential new standard of care given the improvement that we saw in improving progression-free survival. But again, it will be great to see the overall survival results to see if this drug combination will have an impact on overall outcomes. And I will pass it over to Janice.
Thanks, Olivia. My biggest concern on that trial that was presented is right now we currently have, Trodelvy as a second line in the metastatic TNBC setting. And moving it to first line, if we really are seeing a huge improvement in progression-free survival in that first line, I think is very, very exciting. Triple negative, as you know, has few targeted treatment options, and we haven't been able to utilize the immunotherapies like Keytruda for the majority of patients because of the need for them to be PD-L1 positive. And I believe maybe it's somewhere around 30 to 40% of those with metastatic TNBC are PD-L1 positive, and we know it's also a very imperfect biomarker at this point in time. But I am very concerned, and felt concerned when I was sitting in the session, because grade 3 side effects definitely impact in a negative way quality of life. And as metastatic breast cancer patients, we not only want to live longer, but we want to live better lives. And quality of life is so important. I'm glad to see that they're focusing more on that at the conferences now. We get a lot more information on quality of life, a lot of nods from the clinicians presenting data, how important the quality of life is. So I'm excited about it, but cautiously optimistic, because again, it's a first line treatment. And with triple negative, once we get past first line, if we're using Trodelvy and Keytruda as a first line treatment, that eliminates an additional second line option for triple negative, especially for those, and we have a clear unmet need for those who are PD-L1 metastatic triple negative breast cancer.
Yes, totally agree. Yeah. I think cautiously optimistic is kind of the big theme for a lot of these trial results. So we saw some incremental progress, but nothing that's really moving, or everything's moving the needle, but not necessarily, we're still waiting for more data. So I think that's all I have for my slides. So I will stop sharing.
Great. And I will go ahead and bring up some questions that we've gotten, if you guys wouldn't mind answering some. So it was asked, what excites you the most about the research presented at ASCO among these studies or outside of them?
Would you like to take this one first, Janice?
I'd be happy to. The most exciting sessions that I went to at ASCO this year was the one on ctDNA. We've all been waiting so long for ctDNA to become standard of care in the clinic. So far, it's really only been utilized in clinical trials for those with metastatic breast cancer. So some of the sessions that were presented on ctDNA specifically were the most exciting for me.
I'd have to agree. I think ctDNA is really exciting, big win for patients if we can learn more about their cancer with less invasive treatments and also being able to guide treatments. And so as far as what we talked about today, SERENA-6, I thought was very exciting. While we still definitely need a lot more information, really cool to see that in a big phase 3 trial, and looking forward to hearing more about what happens with that.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you guys said that, because I was going to selfishly plug my own question asking you guys about ctDNA because I saw it in so many talks, but very cool. We had a question from Facebook Live. What are the biggest challenges patients shared about oral or IV treatment? Or that you've heard patients share about that, comparing the two?
Maybe pass that one to you, Janice.
All right. One of the things that I hear the most is it's a convenience factor, or what we consider time toxicity, having to go into the clinic, and especially some of the drugs like Trodelvy, for instance, that is given on days 1, 8, and 15 of a 21-day cycle. That's 3 visits to the clinic. And it's not as simple as just going and being there for 15 or 30 minutes. You may be there for hours. So time toxicity is one of them. I think one of the biggest problems that we have is in how insurance pays for oral versus injectable or IV treatments because it is coded differently. So then you've got the financial toxicity issue that goes along with, will it be covered? We have a lot of patients that have issues getting uh, drugs approved, treatment drugs that have been FDA approved. We have a hard time seeing insurance companies approve them for patients. So I think that's a huge issue.
Great. A couple clinical trial related questions. First, when should people consider joining a clinical trial?
Can take that one. So you can really consider a clinical trial at any stage of your breast cancer treatment. But some of the ideal times would be before you have received any treatment, when your doctor is considering switching a treatment, or when you have limited treatment options available. So those are the best opportunities to kind of ensure that your eligibility is max. A lot of these trials have pretty specific eligibility criterias, but definitely having this conversation with your doctor as soon as you can is the best way to set yourself up well for being able to join a clinical trial.
Great. And I guess in addition to that, what are some of the benefits and potential challenges of participating in clinical trials from your perspectives? What do you want people to know as well overall about?
Would you like to take this one first, Janice?
As a patient, I would say one of the biggest benefits is that you're participating in research. So a trial that you're in may be a novel drug class, it may be a novel drug, it may be a new combination, and it may be your best bet for the best outcome as far as getting a treatment that may work very, very well for you. But I think also without clinical trial participants, research doesn't move forward.
Totally agree with that. And I've talked to a few researchers about this, and one of the things I hear very often is when you participate in a clinical trial, you're given an opportunity to receive tomorrow's treatment today. So nothing becomes a new standard of care without participation in clinical trials. So that's the best way we can learn. So definitely a great opportunity to potentially receive something that might work better than the current standard of care.
Excellent. And would you mind plugging how people can find a clinical trial that they're eligible for?
Sure. So there's so much great information on the internet and komen.org. You can also check out breastcancertrials.org. That's a great resource for searching for clinical trials that would be right for you. And also Komen. Komen has several clinical trial website or clinical trial pages on our website where we have information where you can learn about whether or not clinical trials are right for you and to learn more about clinical trials. And then we also have a few other on the same page that was just shared in the chat. You can learn about different clinical trials that are ongoing to see if anything would be right for you.
Awesome, thank you. And then another question too, you guys touched on this a bit when you were presenting the studies, the big studies at ASCO, and you talked about like the cautious optimism and whatnot, but would you comment a little further on your thoughts about these new treatments becoming standard of care and like what kind of timeline that might be on?
I can take a stab at this one. From my experience, since I've started in this position and started following all this stuff, is it's really hard to predict when some of these things become standard of care. So after the phase 3 trials are completed, the companies who are running the trials will send the data to regulatory authorities, the FDA, to see if and then they will take into account the data to see how it compares to the current standard of care, how the side effect profile compares, and whether the benefit is worth the potential side effects. And after their deliberation, then usually you'll see FDA approval. But even after FDA approval, usually it takes some time to adopt into the standard of care. But luckily, what we're seeing is a lot of new options for patients. So patients will have many options to choose from. We're seeing that with like these ESR1 mutations, other mutations, particularly for the ER positive breast cancer patients like PIK3CA. We're getting a lot of new options for targeting these different mutations. So more options means that doctors and patients together can talk about what might work best for them. And once these drugs are approved, then patients will get more options, which is great. Do you have anything to add to that, Janice?
The only thing I would add to that is that it seems when we have really compelling data that is presented from phase 3 trials at the bigger conferences like ESMO or ASCO or San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium, we often see FDA approval following within months or maybe a year or so after that compelling data has been presented. I think an important thing to remember too is that we not only need FDA approval for those drugs to get to clinic and to become standard of care, there can sometimes be a little bit of a lag between when the payers, meaning the insurance companies, actually pick up and put these drugs on their formulary. So occasionally we have to have peer-to-peer reviews between our oncologists and the insurance companies. So that's something that can cause just another slight delay in actually getting access to the drugs themselves.
There we go. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I think we've concluded a lot of our questions. So before I transition, do you guys have any other closing thoughts that you'd like to share?
I can just start by saying I think it was a very exciting ASCO. Like I said, I was really excited to see how we saw all these big talks across all different types of breast cancer. So definitely a lot to look forward to, especially as we learn more about some of these trials that were presented and we learn more information. But yeah, really excited to see where it's all going.
And I'll just follow that up with, I was also excited. I'm really hopeful that by the time we get to the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium, that we have made some progress on getting some of these phase 3 drugs moving forward to FDA approval. But also one of the most exciting things too is when you attend one of these conferences and you see not only what's being presented as a phase 1 through 3 trial, but you also often see what's in the pipeline, and especially for hormone receptor positive metastatic breast cancer, when you look at what's in the pipeline, what's to come in the next several years, there's an incredible number of not only new drugs, but new classes of drugs that are being tested and new combinations. So I think it's very exciting. My biggest hope is that by San Antonio this year, because there hasn't been a lot on metastatic triple negative over the last several years, especially since immunotherapy was FDA approved. So I'm very hopeful that we will get some movement forward in metastatic TNBC in the near future.
I love that. I love that optimism. Thank you guys so much. Like Anne said in chat, this was incredibly insightful and educational for me, and I'm sure for many of our viewers. I'm really thankful that this is also recorded so we can revisit some of the information that was shared today and kind of slow it down if needed. So we're so excited and appreciative that you all could join us today for this event. And I want to express our gratitude, especially to the speakers, Janice Cowden and moderator Olivia Anthony. Today's session was recorded, as I mentioned, and it will be posted on our landing page very soon, so you can rewatch it or view previous sessions that you might have missed. Please help us spread the word about this important content with your friends, family, and healthcare professionals, and visit our landing page to sign up for events or to sign up for the newsletter and stay informed at komen.org/NBC series. Once again, we want to acknowledge our sponsors of the 2025 NBC Impact Series. Their generous support allows us to continue to bring this community together to share important resources, information, and experiences. So again, thank you to our premier sponsors, AstraZeneca, Merck and Gilead, and our signature sponsors, Daiichi Sankyo and Novartis. This series is made possible because of their generosity. Again, also, please help us by completing a survey, which you can find in the chat. We'll drop that in. Your feedback is very important and it's helpful for us for future MBC program planning. Finally, the next event in the MBC Impact Series will be on August 19th at 1 p.m. Central, and the topic is Managing Neuropathy from MBC Treatments, which will feature Komen scholar Dr. Brian Schneider. Thanks again, everyone, so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.